Latinx, a person of Latin American origin or descent, used as a gender-neutral or non-binary alternative to Latino or Latina.
Latinx, we're black, we're brown, we're white. We're immigrants, we break binaries and cross borders. We speak all languages and are of all abilities, faiths, spiritualities, sizes, gender identities, sexual orientations, and documentation statuses, and we're here to stay.
I'm Alejandra.
I'm Ana.
This is Latinx Mental Health Podcast, where we talk to therapists, researchers, artists, activists, and students about their experiences in the intersections of mental health and Latinx identity. In each interview, we aim to connect through our voices, our struggles, and our triumphs, as we sample a different herbal tea, just like Abuela used to make.
For this episode, we spoke to Adrian Villegas, director of the Latino Comedy Project. We drank chamomile tea with elderflower cordial and talked about the importance of representation for people of color in the Austin theater scene, the role of comedy in mental health, and the upcoming production of Estar Guars.
The Latinx Mental Health Podcast is not a substitute for professional mental health care. We encourage you to seek resources and support in your community.
This episode was recorded prior to Austin's shelter-in-place order in the spring of 2020. Follow the Latino Comedy Project for updates about showings of Estar Guars.
All right, so welcome, Adrian, to the show. We're really excited to have you today.
Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So we're just going to jump right into the questions.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you to improv and theater?
I'm from Waco, Texas originally, and I've been in Austin for 27 years. Yeah, so I've been here a long time. And I've always been a writer and an artist since I was a little kid, obsessively so. But if you want the short version of why I got into performing and live theater stuff, it was totally from necessity. Because at the time in the late 90s, I had been writing a lot, producing a lot of material, and the only way I could, the most efficient way I could see to get it out in the world was by doing it myself. So the first thing I actually ever did, as a full-blown production, was a one-man show called Six Mexicans Named Gonzalez, and again, that was all necessity. That was all driven by necessity because it's like, I want to see this kind of material in the world. I didn't have any connections to any theater companies or any kind of platform or means to do it. So that became the first step. And then that led to, being asked to begin the Latino Comedy Project and everything that's come since then. So what drove all that, though, was wanting to see, material from our community, reflecting who we are, what our concerns are, what our struggles are, what our personalities are, all those, things, wanting to see that in the world. That was the main goal. And it took me a few years to come to that mission because, there was, for a lot of my life, I didn't do anything that was strictly about the cultural issues and stuff like that. So I had to kind of ask myself at one point in my 20s, like, what kind of material do I want to commit myself to doing, And a big part of that is asking, well, what is not being done, right? And that's kind of been a through line to everything since then. Like, what doesn't exist? And in the case of the Latino Comedy Project, it was like, there isn't a platform for brown people in this town to create their own material and produce their own material and be on stage. And so that's been a recurring, impetus for everything. So, because there still isn't enough of any of this,
Yeah, that's how our podcast came about too.
Exactly, saw a need, and
we were frustrated and where's
representation?
Where's our representation? And we just decided to do it ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's part of why we wanted to have you on here, because I feel like that's a theme that really unites all of our different work.
And that's the hero's journey too.
Right, that's true.
You're trying to fulfill a greater purpose, greater than yourself, and you're taking a chance on yourself.
I like that.
Totally. I love it. I love that framing.
You went off the beaten path too. Your own beaten paths, right?
Exactly.
And have you been fulfilled, and have you helped fulfill other people through what you're doing?
From what we've heard, I feel fulfilled.
I feel pretty fulfilled.
Well, see?
Do you feel fulfilled?
Well, that's a bigger issue I've reflected a lot on lately, particularly the last few years. I can get into all that about like the timing of what I'm doing and how and whatever. But thing that I keep getting, that keeps becoming reinforced to me through various ways is just that when you're doing what you're supposed to be doing for the right reasons, when you're doing the right thing for the right reasons, there's so much fulfillment in that.
Totally.
And the universe, like, whatever that is, it lines up with you in a lot of ways at pivotal moments. It's interesting. I mean, maybe you guys have experienced that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Things falling into place, meeting the right people.
Exactly.
Right.
And it's weird. And when you really think about it, I mean, it really is proof of something, because what are the odds of meeting anybody for any reason that lines up in any way out of all the people that are out in this city, in the world?
Yeah.
You know?
Millions of people.
Yeah. So, I mean, what are the chances that you're going to be meeting the exact people you need to be meeting at a particular moment for whatever it is you're trying to do? So that kind of thing has been happening for me a lot in the last few years, particularly. I always take that as it doesn't surprise me anymore. It lifts me up, but it doesn't surprise me. And I always take it as a sign of like, you're on the right path.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Latino Comedy Project a few times. So can you tell us what that is? And for listeners who don't know already, and kind of how it came about, what it looks like.
The Latino Comedy Project was begun in 1998 as a comedy sketch troupe. And I was asked to be one of the founders and one of the early directors of it, and eventually I became the primary artistic director. But it really was created to fulfill a void, because you had white theater companies in town, and then you had like even at UT where they were casting mostly white actors, and so we had the belief. And Maria Rocha, who's right now the leader of the Indigenous Cultural Institute out of San Marcos, was the one who had actually invited me to help begin the group. And it was her brainchild. Like, she's the one that had the idea. And, they're like, her and Mario Garza are like a second set of parents to me when I was here in Austin. But we believe that there was a lot of talent out there that was untapped because of the exclusiveness of the community here, and which is still a problem, which I'll address also later, because I've helped begin this company called this organization called the ATX Stage Diversity for that purpose, to try to like unify artists of color in town. And so we just figured we were filling a void of like providing opportunities, and we were totally correct in our assumption that there was a lot of talent out there, because I mean, immediately the people that we have in were incredibly talented, and we were creating original material, and it was proven immediately, and the shows were successful right from the start. And
Absolutely.
So, and that's continued over the years and taken various forms, different cast. There's been some cast members that have stuck around the entire time, that have come and gone and returned. And I took a break from it like in, I don't know, 2011 or 2012 or something like that. I can't remember. But I took a break from it for like 4 or 5 years. I had to reassess a lot of things creatively. And also sometimes you need to stop and ask yourself, are you doing things because they're what you should be doing, or are you doing them because it's what you're used to doing?
Yeah,
right?
totally.
So there's that routine that we're always in danger of falling into, that is not really enriching ourselves anymore, and is not challenging ourselves. And I had to take some time off to reflect on that. And then the group had an opportunity to have a reunion show in 2016, late 2016. Michael Trejo, one of the original members, actually opened up the door with the Out of Bounds Festival here in town, and they invited us to do a reunion show in late 2016. So then the question was, what do we want to do? Do we want to like do a greatest hit show, or do we want to do like something fresh? And I'm like, we've always tried to be on the edge of what is happening. Yeah. So that's when we did that show Gentrifucked, which was about what's happening here in Austin still. And that was the beginning of what I'm doing now, with what I'm continuing to do. Then, I mean, we did that show just thinking, we're going to come back and show like, oh, we still got it, and we can still do it. And we didn't even think beyond that. We thought we prove ourselves, and then and that show was like a success. It was sold out. Yeah. It was the only show at the Out of Bounds Festival that sold out in advance that year. But then, I don't know, there was this, and then we went to San Francisco Sketch Fest with it. Did it in the Mission District, and it was a sellout over there too, and people responded to it as if it was about their community, because that's what was happening in the Mission District.
Right. Yeah.
But then I think this awareness happened where we were like, the response to what we were doing it was almost as if I kind of felt like we needed to continue doing it almost as a public service.
Yeah.
That's kind of been what's driven its continuation since then. It's like, who else, again, filling the void. If we're not doing this kind of work, who is going to do it? And even,
Right.
I mean, even Gentrifucked is a great example. That's been a problem in Austin for years.
Yeah.
Yes.
None of the comedy people in town were taking that on. They weren't trying to address it, I guess, because the predominantly white comedy community here in Austin didn't think of it as their problem, even though we've had multiple white theater companies shut down
Yeah.
Right.
in that time. So I started looking at it as a public service, and so did the group. And there's an emotional public service to that, big time. I mean, I've given a lot of thought to, like, what's the reason for continuing to do this, and what are you providing to the audiences? Like, what outlet are you providing to the audience? Which also plays into Estar Guars. I mean, Gentrifucked was definitely done for that reason, and Estar Guars was maybe even more consciously done for that reason.
I think that before I go on to the next question, when you were saying that it was one of the only shows that sold out, pre-sold out, I think that sort of flies in the face of what a lot of media managers are saying about POC-run projects.
Yeah.
That, like, they can't be sold, they're not viable.
Exactly. I was thinking that too.
Yeah.
That there's
It's
like
a
not a
line.
market for it. Like that's such a common narrative. And I
Yeah.
think it's part of the harmful stereotyping in general, right? Of like what a community looks like and like around racism and classism and how those things intersect.
Yeah.
But it just goes to show your work and other work like it that emotional piece you're talking about is so huge, and that people of every background love theater and love artistic expression and want to be able to be involved in things like that, for sure.
And people want to see themselves reflected.
Exactly.
And there's so many communities that get left out when we talk about who's controlling the media, who's controlling publishing. I won't get into the American Dirt thing, but that's been my
gosh,
that's been my
yes.
soapbox.
And
Yeah.
I think, again, that idea of like, well, okay, why are white comics not talking about this stuff? Well, who's their audience, right? Because I think the other thing is like, who would feel discomfort with these conversations,
Right.
and who would feel heard and seen finally with these conversations and with this type of like comedy content. I think that's really important because it's, for me, even representative of a larger conversation in the country right now of like, where does the discomfort rise up that we're not even willing to engage with some of these conversations that need to happen?
Yeah.
And that's the first place you need to go for comedy.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, it's funny because I remember somebody told me they heard a white dude walking out of one of the Gentrifuck shows. And he was like, hipstery dude or whatever. And he was like, oh, that was a great show. I think they were talking about me. And I'm like, yeah, we were, dude.
Self-awareness.
I know.
It's a beautiful
Look
thing.
at that.
And I had people who were allies that said it made them uncomfortable at times.
Yeah, totally.
Because they were having to question, like, well, what role have I been playing in this, right?
Yeah.
That's powerful, though.
And Star Wars was a sold out run, and I think people are attracted to truth. Now, the other thing is if you can promise them truth in an entertaining format, I mean, it's almost irresistible, right?
Totally.
But then that's the tightrope that you have to walk. Can you manage to be honest and hit the targets that need to be hit, but also deliver the laughs?
Yeah, still be funny.
Yeah, it's it's challenging. But what you were saying about being seen and that's serving that, there's also the thing of, you said people feeling themselves reflected, right, in the
Yeah.
work, and that is incredibly important. The other thing is seeing their worldview reflected back. And that was something that was served by both Gentrifucked and Estar Guars, because it's almost that thing, the public service aspect comes in also letting people know they're not crazy
Yes.
and they're not alone.
Yeah.
That's a huge part of what I think that's actually built in to everything I've been doing since the beginning, but especially the last few years. It's like the catharsis of everybody sitting together and seeing a commentary that reflects the way that they're experiencing the world, because
Yes.
we're inundated with so much
Bullshit.
bullshit, and I feel like
Gaslighting, too.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Intentional psychological brutalization
Yes.
daily now,
Yes.
where people go, well, should I just give up? Am I crazy? I mean, I'm hearing this. And so there's something very invaluable in being able to go into a room and sit with other people, and you see work that's telling it the actual truth as you are experiencing it, that you don't see reflected in the major outlets. There's something very fulfilling about experiencing that for an audience, and also reinvigorating maybe in a way, like
Yeah,
refueling your spirit,
totally.
you know? So I see that as a definite, like, a thing that needs to be accomplished with the stuff that I put out there.
Absolutely.
And laughter is so cathartic too.
Laughter is medicine, big time.
Yeah.
I laugh a lot. I'm like a really easy, stupid laugh. I mean, I've had people. I remember back years ago, I had two instances like within a year of each other where I had people like move away in movie theater watching comedies, move away from me. This old white dude was pissed. It was like a Rushmore, the movie Rushmore, and I was laughing my ass off. And this old dude got up and he was like, made this face. I was like, and he got up and moved away. And these white girls behind me one time, we were watching. It was at Something About Mary when that movie was out. And I remember them getting mad. They were like getting back there making noises and mad that I was like, and I'm like, this is a fucking comedy. You fucking leave. But and then another time I went to a short film festival. I showed up late to at the Guadalupe in San Antonio, and it was started, and the room was dark. I went in, sat down, watched some of the whatever short films were left, and I was laughing and reacting. And afterwards, a friend of mine had a film in there, and I went up to him. I was like, "Hey, man, I came in late." He goes, "Oh no, I knew you were here." So I mean, like, I love to laugh, and I feel like it adds years to your life.
Sure.
I feel like if you enjoy
And
it,
it's contagious.
Yeah.
it really is. I'm also often the guy that starts everybody laughing because in a room, because I don't give a shit if I'm the only one laughing. I don't give a shit, and I'll be the only person sometimes in a theater or whatever watching and laughing at things that I find funny. But it's very useful to have that person who will start the laughter. It's funny because people are inhibited. There's a psychology to audiences. And it's like how closely they're sitting together, how many are in the room, if they're spread apart, if you played pre-show music to loosen them up or to make them feel like there's a silence that inhibits them before the show. I mean, there's all these psychological aspects to it. So I've actually had friends thank me after shows like, "I'm glad you were here."
Right.
You were the show. You were the warm-up.
You kind of like give permission, right, for everybody else to like join you.
Which is sad in a way, right? That we feel we need permission to enjoy ourselves sometimes, right?
Totally.
It's funny. So I'm from El Paso originally, and so it's like 80-something% Latinx.
You have no problem laughing.
Well, I love going to the movies in El Paso because it's like all of these people talking, and it'll be like, "Ay, cucuy," or, you know, like, I'll go with my grandma, and she'll just be like, "¿Qué?"
like in the middle of the movie.
Yeah, like everybody talking in the middle of the movie.
She's watching her novela.
Yeah.
In
Ay,
her
qué
living room,
fea.
like,
Like, people, and like, it's just, it's
That's a
different
communal
spaces.
experience. Yeah, totally. And there's a different energy in that.
Yeah. So it's interesting you're talking about like white people responding to you.
They were mad. I mean, like, we're watching comedies in both situations, and they were mad at me
About
for
laughing.
enjoying myself too much. Amazing.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Well, that's
so,
that sort of cultural policing that we do. I think a lot of the time that's very ingrained in a lot of people. But like, we talk a lot about the need for communal healing, right? And so like that, I'm thinking about this experience of like laughter in community being so powerful.
Yeah, and just thinking about like audiences,
Yes.
like what it's like to be in an audience with people like you. I think
Totally.
I took it for granted growing up.
Till you came here.
Yeah, till I came here, and it's like nobody's pulling out their burritos in the theater and like talking. And, you know, those are the things that you miss. So it's neat to have that space.
well, you never know what experience you're providing for anybody either, because I remember after we did Gentrifucked, the first run of it here in Austin, we did the show at Out of Bounds as a one-off, and then we did our own run that we produced the next year at the Spider House. And then I saw comments afterwards of one young woman who ended up starting her own Latino improv group, just saying how apparently it was a new kind of experience. Because we had Vanessa Gonzalez, who was one of our openers. We had a group called Migas, who were one of our openers. And then we did our thing. And she was like, apparently it was some really emotional experience for her. She was like, I'm looking at these brown people. They're not caring if white people get the jokes.
Totally.
They're unabashed, and they're having something to say, and they're confident. And the show was also great. And she was just like overwhelmed by that. And it was inspiring to her. So you could take that experience for granted somewhat coming from, but she'd been disconnected from it.
Yeah.
So she knew what that was like once upon a time, but then had been thrust in this kind of more white world for many years.
Yeah.
And it was reminding her of where she came from and what she would like to get back in touch with. So That's another thing that's incredibly powerful psychologically is the power of a good example.
Totally.
Yeah.
Just the power of showing that something's possible.
Yeah.
I mean, that, especially if it's like some young people
Absolutely.
being exposed to something, it's like you can't even put a value on the power of that.
Yeah.
I'm always trying to stay aware of that too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So going back a little bit, can you tell us about Estar Guars, just more specifically about it, and also I'm just so curious about why Star Wars. What was it about Star Wars?
Well, there's a mixture of reasons. Well, one, I'm the first Star Wars generation. I was that first generation of kids that grew up with it, and that's been part of my life, my entire life. I mean, I'm a big geek, and also all my drawing and writing, because I've just gotten back into art the last couple of years. I've done the last couple of years of the Indigenous Cultures Institute powwow T-shirts, and I'm going to do their 10th anniversary one this year.
Awesome.
But drawing and writing was all kind of initially inspired by Star Wars. I was drawing Darth Vader and Yoda, and eventually E.T. and Indiana Jones, and I was, I draw little pictures in grade school, and my classmates would pass them around, and everybody's like, "Oh, look, it's E.T." But so it was a big part of something I've been a big fan of and very familiar with all my life. And you mentioned something earlier about how Star Wars was a big part of your family and culture, right?
Yeah, not so much me, but all my cousins.
Yeah.
Like I went to go visit my cousin in Puebla, and he sat me down and he was like, "You're gonna watch all of these." And I was in this beautiful city, and he was like, "No, this is a crime. We're gonna sit down. We're gonna watch all of them."
Unacceptable.
Yeah, when the new ones come out, my other cousins, they dressed up. One cousin dressed up like a stormtrooper, and everybody went, and it was just.
You need to make sure they come then this next time.
Well, they're all over, not here, but it would.
Tell them.
They would love it. Yeah,
Yeah, they would.
If they visit, and it just so happens to coincide, they would have so much fun. But yeah, and it was, I don't know, it was just such a big part of their lives and brought them so much joy. And it's it felt like it, I think it just felt like it was made for everybody.
Yeah, my dad is a huge Star Wars fan too. I love Star Wars and grew up with it too. And I feel like when people think of a classic Star Wars audience, they probably think of a really white audience. But that series speaks to so many people, like you said.
It's a universal mythology.
Exactly.
Because it was designed to mimic universal mythology.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is a whole other thing. But so there's that aspect of it. But then the trigger was I'd gone to see some mashup shows that people did, and I remember just thinking, this was 2017? Yeah, 2017. And thinking, they're not even familiar with what they're mashing up. They don't love it. They obviously haven't done any research, and it was just kind of annoying. Right. But then it got me thinking, well, what would I do? What would I be able to do if I would try to do something like that? And Star Wars was the first thing that came to mind. But then I thought, well, what would make it worth doing? And then you think, what if you do a take on it that's the meta premise is it's a Jorge Lucas. What would Star Wars look like if a Jorge Lucas, a militant geek, who has a whole other set of reference material, because Lucas was drawing from samurai and westerns and all this stuff. But what would a Jorge Lucas who's drawing on Chicano history and all this stuff? What would Star Wars look like if he did it? Then I remember when I first had the idea, in spring of 2017. Immediately, there were 4 pages of notes in my Google Docs, and I just left it alone. Later in 2017, I was doing my one-man show, Barrio Days, with my friend Nick, who was helping me do the tech stuff, and he's one of the original members of the Latino Comedy Project, too. He's our token white guy, we call him. He's also my brother from another mother. Yes. But I told him the idea, and this was many months later after I originally had the idea, and it was one of many ideas you have, right?
Sure.
So, and he said, "Oh, yeah, that sounds cool." He goes, what would be really great is if you were to have it on the week of May the 4th and Cinco de Mayo.
Right.
And when he said that, I was like, oh, man, you fucker. Now we have to do it.
You got to do it.
It was just such a brilliant marketing idea, and it fit so perfectly.
Totally.
And it's also, I always find this to be true, that the best ideas are the ones that should have been obvious from the beginning. And for some reason they weren't, but then whenever it's oh yeah, of course that should be that.
I feel that.
Yeah.
I feel that.
Right?
Yes.
So he made that suggestion, and then I started really thinking about it, and I really had to, and then it really kind of came to life more because I had to ask myself at that point, what would make it worth doing for me? Because one of the reasons I stopped doing the LCP for a while is because I felt like I was doing writing that was mainly parody and satire and kind of superficial. I'd gotten away from like the human soulful stuff that I had done in my one-man shows. And I thought, well, how can this be more than just the brown Spaceballs? You know, I didn't want it to just be that. So then it became like, well, what if there's a political allegory in it? What if there's a real emotional content in it? What if there's like some actual drama that happens? And also, what if I can make these characters likable and relatable on their own level and not just as like brown takes on, because it is reconfigured completely. The gender stuff is totally rethought. In fact, it's a criticism of Star Wars in a way, in that way. So then when I figured that out, I thought, okay, I think I can make this rich enough for myself to write that it's worth doing. Then it was like, how are we going to do it? Because it's not a small project. So then we figured we had to do a Kickstarter. So we did a Kickstarter in 2018 in the summer, which is a whole other struggle. I mean, those are like a whole other drama. And it's stressful and
constant.
Yep. And there's no guarantee of success. And I try to tell people about crowdfunding things. Don't think about it as an addendum to your project. It is its own project.
Yeah,
it's its own campaign, and it's not the same as convincing people to go to a show, because you got to make people go to a show. It's like, here's how cool this show is going to be. You want to go? Okay, yeah.
Right.
Or no. With the Kickstarter, it's like, look at this idea. It's not a reality yet, but it might be if you help us. But here's some other things you could get for if you give us this much. And then they're thinking, well, do I have the money right now? Does this seem like it's how many people have given? Is it even close to getting the goal? If not, then I won't. I mean, there's like 5 or 6 filters that you have to get people to jump through to support you. But it ended up being successful, and we were able to do it last year, the Estar Guars, for the first time, and the production of it in itself was a big struggle too, because it was the biggest show I'd ever helped put together in terms of the needs of the production, because you can't fake, you need to have costumes, you need to have video. We had like a friend of mine, Eric Sylvester, did like digital effect shots, like I don't know if you saw in the video, the chancla ship and all that stuff. Yeah, that was a digital.
The preview was really good. It was amazing. Yeah.
Well, he had to do many more shots like that for the show, for the actual show. That was for the Kickstarter video. So, you know, it was. So I'll explain to them, like it's a Star Destroyer that's in the shape of a chancla, because it'll strike mortal terror in the Resistencia. Oh yeah. So it took it went along, and it was, I got an incredible cast to be in it last year. I got really lucky because it was a really great chemistry of the people who were involved, and the audiences showed up.
It's time to refill our cups. Join us at the table for a nice chat and a cup of tea in a part of the episode we call the sobremesa. All right.
I'm frustrated.
Tell me more.
So, as you know, I have an autoimmune disease.
Yes.
And I've been getting a lot of unsolicited health advice lately. Now, this is something I'm used to, but for some reason, it's particularly bothersome this week.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like, a lot of people have a lot of ideas of what they think has worked for them. And while we do have similarities in biology amongst all of us, we are also very individual creatures. And we don't all have the same understandings of like what health even means, or whether it's a moral obligation or not, or whether diet culture is complete bullshit or not. And so we end up with a lot of unwanted advice from people, I think, outside of chronic illness, even, right? Of like, what's like, this works for me, great. But then like you're getting the barrage of it.
Yeah. And I've gotten a little bit better at speaking up and just saying no thank you to the advice, or just changing the subject. But every so often somebody will say something, or I'll listen into a conversation and I just can't quite shake it, or not even that I can't quite shake it. It's just I'm flabbergasted, or how would I describe this? I just get angry.
Yeah.
And then I don't feel like I know what to do with it.
With your anger.
Yeah, or, whether or not to say something.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes, social workers, I'll sometimes go into like advocacy
Right.
mode, and I feel like I have to inform everybody of what's correct and what isn't because, of some ideal. But then when it comes to, your own lived experience, that can feel like a tremendous burden.
Absolutely.
And I think similar, you mentioned diet culture. It's like when you're, just out in the world and you're hearing somebody talk about like whatever extreme diet they're on. Like at what point do you say something? At what point do you just say nothing?
Right. And whether that person's like not talking to you or just telling you or giving you advice, like there's also this range of like how we encounter these things.
Yeah.
And the pieces around like sometimes facts aren't really what convince people. And so
I would say most of the time.
Yeah. So like, and I think there's actually research on that.
Really?
And so, yeah. So like the temptation to no, but these things I know to be true, right? But that's like kind of what the other person is doing too.
Yeah.
And so I think that makes it really hard to then basically what is most compelling is like our lived experience and our stories. And like you said, that like places the burden then on us to share them in order to try to like convince someone usually of like our body autonomy or even like our basic humanity, which we should not have to convince people of.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's because spring is coming. Like, I just feel like I'm hearing it more.
Yeah.
People are talking about detoxes.
Right.
People are asking me if I've done keto. I get, sent things about magnets and crystals.
Right,
and have you tried this? What is pomada in English? Ointments, like rubbing stuff. And I think I'm done with that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm feeling really done with that.
PSA for everyone.
This is a PSA. Please do not give me any health advice. I don't want it. I don't need it. I really don't want it. And I'm sick of it.
And the thing I think that I've learned most about just working with you and being friends with you is that there's a lot of unseen labor that people with chronic illness do on a daily, hourly, minutely, secondly basis to take care of themselves. And that is not something that's visible to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And then there's this onus placed on the individual to like heal themselves as if that's like possible or the right goal or whatever. So all of these things that you are doing all the time, I wonder if that kind of diminishes them a bit to hear someone else be like, but this one easy trick could just solve everything.
Yeah, it's a little, I guess the word I've used before is demoralizing. Because they don't see what's happening and they don't know how much work you put into it.
Yeah.
To just like kind of just function.
Right.
And they have no idea. And unless, and then, there are people who for maybe it's worked for them. And that's like another kind of example. But these suggestions are always so loaded. They're always like sort of dripping with morality.
Yes,
and like you should be able to.
Yes.
And you never know exactly what a person is dealing with. And if you wanted, I don't want to tell you exactly what I'm dealing with.
Right.
And even if I did, you still wouldn't know.
Yes.
What it's like to live in somebody else's body or their history or how some of these things can be damaging to your mental health.
Absolutely.
These diets are not like good for you psychologically. Even if they did fix your disease, they can give you all sorts of problems with food.
Absolutely.
So it's not safe. It's not even innocuous sometimes. Sometimes it's downright dangerous. So I guess I just wanted to get on here and ask nicely to think about what you're suggesting and to think about the person you're suggesting it to and to maybe listen a little bit closer.
Yeah, I think that piece around really prioritizing mental health as part of the conversations around health gets lost in all of this.
Yeah.
And it gets deprioritized much of the time. And really, I think when we think about different forms of oppression, the idea of microaggressions, I think, sometimes gets misconstrued as like it's not as meaningful or it's like a smaller hurt. But it's actually meant to be that it happens on a smaller scale. Like that was the original meaning of that word. And so I think that when we reframe it that way, it reminds us that you carry the weight of the system of oppression behind you when you say the thing that implies that entire system. So like when you're saying like one comment implies this huge like background piece, right? Whether you're not aware of that or whether you are and you say it anyway, I think that like shouldn't be underestimated of the effect that it can have on someone. And so here where we focus on mental health and we focus on really prioritizing it as part of our understandings of our entire health and the idea that health is not a moral obligation, this is the exact space, I think, to bring something like what you're talking about in. And I really appreciate that perspective, and I hope that anyone who is dealing with anything like this feels validated and seen in not having to listen to everyone and like trusting yourself, knowing that you are the expert in how you feel and in your experience, and that anyone who's curious about these things really takes kind of a look into what motivates them to say something, what in them is coming out in that, and also to do some education for yourself around, start with Googling health at every size and go from there.
Yeah, and just, I guess, as a final note, I think something to keep in mind always, for those of you who may have a condition or with a loved one with a condition, is to remember that quality of life encompasses many realms and not just one. It's not just, whatever the numbers are, whatever, medical issue are. It's not just about the blood test. It's not just about this sort of objective health ideal. It's about a whole person. And sometimes our physical health has to struggle a little bit for our mental health and for our spiritual health. It's not a perfect balance.
Now back to the interview.
So getting to the psychology of it, the mental, emotional health part of it, we were talking earlier about like, what's your goal, right? What's your emotional goal for whatever it is you're doing, whether you're doing a podcast, what kind of feeling you want people to take away from it. So for Estar Guars, for Gentrifuck, I said, I want people to walk away realizing either one of two things, realizing that there's actual humans affected by gentrification, that it's not just numbers and statistics and property and taxes, that they're human lives. And I wanted people to walk away with that feeling. And also, if there was somebody who was in the process of experiencing that, to feel reflected and empowered in some way and not alone. So for Estar Guars, I said, I want people, because the show really does take on everything that's happening right now. You might not think that from a show called Estar Guars, but it takes on family separation. It takes on the kind of undermining of democracy that we're experiencing right now. It takes on, the racial politics. It takes on, one of the villains is called Darth Vendido. So it takes on these brown people that have bought into white supremacy. There's even subtext of indigenous genocide. I mean, I know I'm not making it sound comedic, but I'm saying all this stuff is woven into it. And the jokes keep coming on top of that. So imagine that.
It is hilarious. I can attest to that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, people, the laughs are all there from beginning to end, but there are serious moments in it. Yeah. But the feeling I wanted people to take from it was, even today when I watch the end of A New Hope, that ending when they're all getting their little medals and they're all lined up and they're all smiling and the music swells and Chewbacca roars and then the little iris out happens and then John Williams' theme hits another level. That still makes me feel good.
Oh yeah.
It is very uplifting and it's very magical, and I thought I want our audience to walk out with that same feeling and to also feel empowered and to feel like strong in the possibilities of doing the right thing in the world and being part of a struggle.
Yeah.
And that the struggles can be won, that they're not easy. There's some very inspiring speeches in the show. People, that's the thing that I love. I thought I'm going to love that people are going to come in thinking it's going to be just the brown space balls.
Right.
And then they get all this other stuff
depth.
that they did not expect.
Yeah.
I mean, there are parts in the show that make people gasp and cry, if you can believe that.
Yeah.
But I wanted people ultimately to walk out with a very positive, uplifted feeling collectively, and I won't ruin how that's achieved at the very end of the show, but it works. And because, again, I was looking at this as a service. I was looking at this, putting the work out there to be a public service in a way.
Yeah, that's a big task to bring all the layers that you're talking about and have people leave with that. But I think it's so needed right now because we've had so many conversations about just the weight of everything that has been coming at us, especially in the last 3-4 years, and what that does to communities, what that does to our mental health, how we feel that, how we experience that as individuals and together. And so I like the idea of the layering being possible, because I think that's something we talk about is that we can kind of go into the mess and still have hope. And that's what it's all about.
Hope is a big part of the show. And I stopped, you're talking about how hard things have been the last few years. I stop to be, I try to be grateful for a lot of things. I try to tell people all the time, be grateful for the problems you don't have. Really, I mean, stop and think about, the things you're not struggling with that other people may have to struggle with. But also try to be grateful in the moment, of the things that, not to be grateful in retrospect only, like, oh, that was great. Oh, I wish that person were around now. But the other thing is, I stop and think, I have an outlet for all the frustrations that you're talking about. I have a creative outlet for those feelings. And I think to myself, if people who don't have that, like how hopeless and horrible that must feel at times, Yeah. So I try through the work to create a catharsis, to provide that thing that they may not have an outlet for.
Yes.
And because it's unthinkable to me that I wouldn't have the outlets that I have. I mean, it's hard enough even with those outlets because you're having to process stuff all the time. And so the work definitely exists, and other projects I'm working on too. They always have some bigger purpose like that. But on the other hand, if it's not good and it's not entertaining and it's not funny, it's none of that other shit matters at all. Like you failed, So that's always the tightrope. It's like you got to make sure that on the immediate surface level that the stuff works as a piece of entertainment, and that people feel like they got their money's worth. So there's a showmanship to that aspect, but then, it's almost like that's the stealth vehicle for all this other stuff, Right. So that's always, that's fun to me to try to figure out how do you get both of those tracks to go to land,
Yeah. I just finished reading Burnout by Emily and Amelia Nagoski, and one of the things that they talk about is how both creative expression that you do and that you experience that other people do in front of you is this amazing outlet for stress relief. Yep. And so it's just so cool sometimes. I get really nerded out by the brain science research, and I think it's really neat that we have all this research to support that. For example, going to a show like this legit helps your nervous system to regulate. I think that is so cool.
Yeah. I mean, and I approach actually creating the work, the actual nuts and bolts creating the work with that in mind. When I'm writing, I have playlists that are just joyful music, music that makes me feel good. And I that's playing on a loop when I'm writing. Because awesome. I'm thinking these endorphins or whatever that I'm releasing while I'm doing all this, that it will filter through in some way, cool. Some intangible way into the final product,
That's a neat approach,
yeah. So it's therapeutic to create it, and hopefully if you're doing your job right as a craftsperson, it's therapeutic for people to experience it.
I need to try that. I listen to Rachmaninoff, and it's very intense.
And what are you producing?
Yeah. I listen to a lot of 70s and 80s and pop and 90s pop and stuff that was in the background when I was a kid, because that's also another thing about creativity. Creativity is almost like a self-hypnosis of putting yourself in a child's mind. Yeah. Right. In the child version of your mind. Totally. Because when I was really young, I spent hours and hours and hours listening to records, and then drawing and writing or whatever for hours and hours. I would get lost in it. So I always get sad that it seems like kids, I see little kids that aren't in school of any kind yet, walking around making up songs and stomping and just not being inhibited at all, and creativity just pouring out of them. And I go, okay, so that somewhere along the way, after they get stuck in a chair in a class, that gets like knocked out of them.
Right.
A lot of us, and luckily I didn't get it knocked out of me, but a lot of kids, they lose that.
Yeah.
So the act of creating is basically just putting yourself in that place again.
Inner child.
Yeah. One of my favorite games that I play by myself. I like to watch little kids when they're just doing crazy stuff like that, you know, like hitting things and jumping and blah, blah, blah. And I like to imagine they're adults.
Yeah. Like them when they will be adults
just like,
one day.
what if like an adult person did that? And like how sort of interesting and funny.
Well, one of my favorite things to do as a therapist is to do the interventions that we do with children with adults. Like give adults bubbles to blow, and sometimes you blow their minds. Like give adults something to color with.
Stickers.
Give adults stickers. Give adults like sand tray. Like there's so many interventions that we do, like play interventions that we do with children. And when I introduce them to adults who are willing to kind of go there with me and like be playful, there's this different thing that comes out, you know? And you're not necessarily going to know exactly what that is, but it reaches this depth that is so beautiful, and it gives permission to like be more expressive and get in touch with some of those innate feelings and sensations and excitement and or depth of emotion that like you wouldn't otherwise. So that's one of my favorite things to do.
And play is a need that we have.
Yes, and I think adults don't get that need met as much as children do, but we still have that need.
Yeah, I mean, I consider myself very lucky that I have a vehicle for all that creativity still, and then I haven't allowed it to die.
Yeah.
You know, because there were plenty of times along the way that I could have, and other people might have even been encouraging me to let it die.
Yeah, I actually would love to ask a question.
The
about
world
that.
wants you to quit.
Totally. No, I'd love to ask a question, because as you're creating something that feels new, something where you may not have seen for yourself what you were creating for other people to see, right? What has helped you to keep going? What has helped you to believe in yourself and in your dream, even when people maybe said it wasn't possible? What has helped to keep you going in this?
The answer to that is different at different times. Like there was a time where, like I said, I was kind of like, I felt like I was on autopilot creatively, and I was just going through the motions, and I was still doing stuff that was effective in its own terms. But then also that cycle was in my general life. So I was like going through the motions in my life as well. And it was a stagnation that went on for a while. And since I've come back to it with a renewed, sometimes you got to hit a low point to really kind of clear the decks, right?
Yeah.
And get some clarity. So when I've come back to this, it's I can tell you what the motivation has been since 2016. And the driving thing is that, well, first of all, just on a very simple level, everything we've done has been successful commercially. Like audiences have shown up, and we've gotten great response to everything. But that's not the result of any kind of ego-driven effort. That's because we're doing what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
It's a fulfillment of a mission, and you're pursuing the right mission. So that's been the fuel for me, is knowing like, you know, you're doing something that needs to be done that nobody else or not enough people are doing.
Right.
And that you know that there's a responsive audience out there who will benefit from you. And then there's also the very simple thing of like with the Estar Guars, I thought about that for like 2 or 3 months. I actually I thought about whether I was going to do it for like 2 or 3 months in late 2017. And part of that was running the idea past people, just strangers, sometimes friends. And when I saw how people lit up, I thought, you know, I don't have to do this. I was actually working on another project that's a bigger project, but I thought I don't have to do this, and it might even be beneficial to this other project not to work on this. But obviously, a lot of people are going to be very happy if this thing exists, and I don't know who else is going to do it. Like Nick told me, whenever I was ran the idea by him, and he says, you know, you're like a comedy person, you're a political geek, you're a Star Wars geek, you're brown. He was like, nobody, you were born to write this, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
And I was like, yeah, I mean, he's right. So it's things like that keep me driven. Now, there have been moments where you do have self-doubt and you go, fuck, what the fuck am I doing? Like during the Kickstarter, I had that feeling a few times. I had more doubts that were just based on the challenge of it, really. Not any, I never had any doubts of whether the idea was a good idea. It was just like trying to get the Kickstarter to be successful and looking at the numbers crawling, and I had to, you just have to be resilient because like that Kickstarter, I had to pull it and relaunch it because I launched it and I didn't go about launching it the right way. And I thought, this is not going to make it. Right. And so after like 4 days, I pulled it and relaunched it like a month later. And, you have to be willing to be honest and also to not be afraid. Like in the short term, that looked like you just fucked up and you're just stupid, don't know what you're doing. Right. But actually I was making a smarter decision in the long term, right? So you just have to, believe in yourself and believe in your judgment and believe in your ideas. But there were times, during that Kickstarter especially, and even during the production of the show, there were so many like challenges that came up, and there were times that I wonder, like, is this gonna turn out the way that I want? Is it gonna be mediocre? And then there was the. I've had to tell people about this in retrospect so they can understand. Some people thought I might have just been being grumpy at the time, but I was like, look. Star Wars is something I've grown up with since I was a kid. It's a part of who I am. At that point, I already spent 1.5 years from when I started working on the Kickstarter to when the opening of the show was. I said, so if this thing sucks, I'm not going to think of Star Wars ever without relating it to this failure.
So there's a lot riding.
Yes, I said this is
a lot of pressure.
Yeah, and I had to explain that to some people later when they were like, because there were like unexpected, curveballs that came up during the production.
Sure.
That were not of my making, but I had to still deal with them. And, I had to explain that to people later, like that idea that this thing was going to be tainted with my own personal failure. So, those moments come and there's low points and there's moments of self-doubt. And I think one thing you need to accept is that those moments of self-questioning are not in and of themselves justification to doubt yourself.
Yeah.
They're part of the process. And if you never question what you're doing, then something's wrong with you.
Right.
And if you never question where you're at with something and assess it and honestly assess things as you go, because I know people even right now that they will not look at the outcomes of their things that they do honestly. They will hide from the reality, or they'll try to gloss over the reality, and you keep getting bad results that way, So that's all part of the process. Like having those moments of self-doubt are part of the process. Don't let them consume you. And also remind yourself of what you're doing it for. In my case, I was like, this needs to exist. And I remember saying more than once to people who were working the most close with me, the failure is not an option here.
Yeah.
Like with the Kickstarter, I said, we need to figure out, because there were things that came up even during the Kickstarter that were like unexpected curveballs that like, I had this great plan in place. And of course, that never works out that way.
The best laid plan.
So then you go what's plan C, D, E?
Yep.
But the whole driving thing was like, okay, this cannot stop us. This thing cannot, whatever this is, it just came up, cannot stop. So you just got to keep your head down. And it is really like a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step, right? So if you just keep remembering it's every step that's in front of you and not get discouraged by how far the mountaintop is at that particular moment, a lot of things are possible. Everything's a learning experience. Like I would definitely do Star Wars. Like the audience didn't know this because we were struggling to get it really great by the time the audience saw it. But all the journey up to that, if you go back and you look and you're like, well, I would do this at a different time and I would maybe not have hired this particular person or whatever. So you learn from everything. Even, I mean, the detrimental things, that the struggles are useful.
Part of the learning.
Or they should be. I mean, if you learn from them, they're useful. If you don't, you'll just repeat the same mistakes.
Right.
And I think the way things are packaged to us now is that we don't see the struggle. We just see and maybe forever. Like we see the outcome. And I certainly don't feel that I was ever really told that, well, you have to fail before anything is going to come to fruition. Like you have to, like failure is part of the process. Like not, you had your big project, but you had all of these like mini failures and that's a part of it. And the self-doubt is a part of it. And think you're not going to be able to do it is a part of it. Like you were saying, like that is such an integral part of the process. But if we don't allow ourselves to have that process, then the thing doesn't come to fruition.
And sharing that process is really powerful.
Yeah.
You know what that's a big part of that? A big part of, though, is that doing something you haven't done before. I mean, that's like almost unavoidable. When you're taking on something that's on a scale that you've never tried before, a new experience, which you need to keep doing.
Right.
Like, you need to keep doing that. That was one part
That's
of
how
why I
we
stagnated
go.
for so long, because I wasn't doing that. I wasn't challenging myself.
Right.
So when you take on something that's a new tier of experience, you're going to have those moments. I mean, and you're going to have, you're going to have moments where you're like, oh, I had this all figured out. Oh, shit. That didn't quite go that way. Well, and then you go, well, what's the next, what's the way around it? What's the way over it or under it or whatever the obstacle is. So, I mean, those moments aren't an indicator of you're doing the wrong thing. They're an indicator that you're doing something new and different and something you probably should be doing,
Totally.
You just got to not give up.
I mean, you said that you had been thinking more specifically about mental health. So I just want to hear what thoughts you had about that.
Well, for myself, it's how therapeutic doing the work is. And also, like, I since I got back into doing art, I meet people who go, oh, I can't draw like that, or I can't do it well. I'm like, do it because you enjoy it, because I'd forgotten how therapeutic doing art, because it was a different part of your brain. Like, I always benefited from writing, and I always enjoyed that, the kind of hole that you fall into with that. But then when I started doing art again, I was like, man, why did I it was after 20 something years I started doing it again. And luckily all the muscle memory came back, but I was like, why did I stop doing this? I would have been benefiting just mentally from doing this all this time.
Yeah.
On the personal level, there's all that therapeutic benefit of it. And I encourage anybody not to be judging what they're doing by some external measure, but just if you get some enjoyment out of it, because it really is there for that first.
Yes.
I mean, everything else is secondary. There's that therapeutic value, but then there's also, like I said, the way that I try to approach the work I'm doing, thinking about what's the therapeutic value going to be for the audience, like why I listen to joyful stuff while I'm trying to create. And it doesn't necessarily even going to be a joyful piece, but just that there's some positive energy that's coming through it in some way, some positive intention, and hopefully that gets transferred to the audience. So yeah, I try to create with joy. I feel like that's a very important emotion. I also feel like, ironically, I'm also trying to create with righteous anger, because I feel like that's an important emotion. That's where the catharsis comes for the audience when you do like what I call radical truth telling. And a lot of times from the very beginning of the Latino Comedy Project, what I was doing with the writing I was creating for the group was like, we need to say the things that everybody's thinking but nobody's saying.
Yeah.
Or that nobody's being allowed to say.
Yes.
Or that...
I'm all about that.
Yes, where all the outlets that we're exposed to are refusing to acknowledge. I mean, there's a million examples. I mean, just in dynamics of dialogue, when you talk about the immigration issue, we're always talking about the immigrants. We're never talking about the businesses who hire them knowingly. When we're talking about... you just go down the list. When you talk about even reproductive rights, we're always talking about what the women... What they're doing wrong or what they should be doing differently. We're never talking about the men who create all these single moms.
Right.
So there's all these that's where you go to say things, because you want to say the things that are just for very specific reasons are being overlooked or ignored. So I feel like that creates a certain catharsis, and I've seen it over and over again over the years. Those are the places I want to go first in a script, And the audience appreciates it, and it's a bonding thing. I'm reminded of a moment in the Estar Guars show where we have Nick Walker, actually, my partner in the group. He plays a fanboy in the audience. So we actually have like a fanboy get up in the middle of the show complaining about the Mary Sue. I don't know if you know what Mary Sue is. It's what these men, these little fragile men, complain about when they see a strong female hero in anything. They always say it's bogus and whatever. So he plays that guy, and I had a friend. So I'm saying this as an example of how this particular thing hit a target, because he gets up in character, but he's in the audience, so the audience figures out pretty quickly it's part of the show.
Yeah.
And he starts like complaining to the actors on the stage, and he calls the actress Barbara Mojica playing Princesa Leia Organa Cortez. He tells her that she's just a Mary Sue, and she doesn't know what that is. And she starts wanting to take her earrings off and kick his ass, whatever.
Yeah.
But I had a friend of mine who's this very militant, and I say that in the best possible sense, very conscientious, aware friend of mine. And when he got up, she thought he was real. And she was about to get up and tell him to shut the fuck up. She told me this later. She goes, I was going to tell him to shut the fuck up. But she said she had a friend of hers who was actually an Indian woman who she brought to the show who loved the show.
Yeah.
Didn't have to be Latina to love the show, but she stopped her and said, wait a minute, I think this is part of the show. So there was about to be a fight.
An actual,
yeah. And I told Nick that later, and he was like, oh my God, that's hilarious. So, I mean, but the thing is, so that tells you right there that it was addressing a phenomenon that was in people's minds, because she was ready to respond to it and shut him down, because she, as being a brown woman, was tired of hearing that shit, you know? Yeah. So, I mean, I try to go, luckily, crisis was averted. No violence was necessary that evening. But I won't ruin it for you, but what happens to him in the context of the show is pretty damn hilarious. But anyway, so I look at all of that as therapeutic. Truth is therapeutic, right? Yeah. So that kind of is what drives all the comedy. And I'm working on another idea that I've been working on since right before the Latino Comedy Project got back together. I was working on this idea. So it's kind of been continued to be worked on the side. It's this huge fantasy genre. You can even say it's kind of a superhero thing, but that simplifies it too much. That's set in the mid-'70s. And it's on the surface, it's going to be this great like fantasy kind of coming of age thing, but it's really a vehicle to reintroduce and to educate about ancient Mesoamerican beliefs and philosophy and indigenous philosophy in general that we've totally gotten away from, right? So that is going to serve a dual purpose, right? So I'm always trying to like look at what the greater benefit is, because if it's just a matter of like doing something that's cool or just seems funny or cute or whatever, I'm past the point anymore of that being enough, you know?
Right.
And there's a lot of catharsis in having your experience affirmed.
Yes, for sure.
And I definitely keep that in mind all the time when I'm writing these things. You're going to be surprised by the different layers in Estar Guars, because it's a comedy, it's a parody on the surface, but it also is a parody of the phenomenon, because there's a fake documentary about the making of Estar Guars that plays interspersed in the show. And then there's the political allegory part of it, because the emperor is Donald Trump.
Right.
And then there's the characters all have their own souls and stuff. And it's ultimately very uplifting, and it's very funny.
Awesome. I feel like your story is very inspiring for anyone who's interested in improv or acting and maybe is part of the Latinx community. So if there's a listener like that right now, what would you want them to know about how to really get into theater, how to get into improv? What would you want them to know? That's
a good question, and it's interesting to have to answer that, because I don't think anybody... I came to it to a certain path that is not common, I don't think. I mean, I literally was like, do it yourself. And not everybody has that. I mean, I was a much better writer than I was a performer when I started, but I made do as the one-man show. So I don't think anybody could just do that. But I feel what I did benefit from very early on when I got involved with the Latino Comedy Project is finding your community.
Yeah.
So I think anybody would benefit from finding your people, find out where the people are who are doing the kind of work you want to be part of. Ask them how you can be involved. Everybody could use some help. I mean, you could get in on any level. If you can make yourself useful and helpful, you will be everybody's best friend. Really, right. You'd be my best friend. I could use your help, you know. But that's one reason why I got involved in the ATX Stage Diversity in the last few months, because it's a new organization. But we have this whole gamut of things that we're going to be trying to do. One is unifying all the different minority communities, in the arts community.
Yeah.
Because we're all separate. We're all like on our own islands. And even within our own communities, we don't know what other people are doing.
Right.
So right now we have the Instagram page at ATX Stage Diversity that we share what events are happening from other. It's like we just say, if you add us or hashtag us, we will share your event with other people. The bigger picture is, and that also means like auditions. That also means letting people know when there's auditions happening.
Right.
And we've already had I mean, we've had a couple of mixers. We've already had people connect, like Christine Huang, who was spoke at our mixer on Sunday. She said she met like 3 Asian actors at our mixer that she considered that a huge win because they're so hard to find Asian men who are in the community ready to go, you know?
Right.
Because she's having auditions for a show soon. So we want to do more of that and also, you know, have a monthly calendar where we have all of the people of color events that are happening in any given month in one place. So you don't have to like go look through the Chronicle and look to see what's the thing that doesn't look like shit, you know?
Right.
So that's part of trying to address what a newcomer or somebody who's looking for those open doors,
Yes.
making those more possible and advocating for them because this is all part of like, it's going to be like a year-long process, I'm sure. We're going to get the website up in the near future. But another thing is going to be to be the advocate for some of these actors. Like, you know, when we started the Latino Comedy Project, if you were one of these brown performers and nobody was giving you any parts or even, you know, yeah, you can be on the tech crew or whatever. Even if you're better than the person they just gave the lead to, what was your recourse? Nothing.
Right.
With a thing like ATX Stage Diversity, we could be the ones saying, can you give us your casting data for the last 5 years?
Right.
Nice.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
And just the specter of that alone,
Yes.
because at the end of the year, you go, we're going to do a yearly report on this.
Yep.
We're going to just say, well, you wouldn't provide it for us, or
Yep.
or you did provide it for us, and look at all this.
This is
look,
your grade.
Yes, look at how white.
That is awesome. I love that idea.
So this is all, but these are all things that take time,
Totally.
and we need
Yes.
help. So
Yes.
if anybody's willing to get involved and volunteer to help do these things, if you have any particular skills in data collection or any of these things, because it takes a village, right?
Absolutely.
So you can get in touch with me at adrian.villegas@lcp.org. That's LCP as in Latino Comedy Project. .org. Those are the kind of things we're hoping to accomplish that can make opportunities more open and more likely for other people coming up, because they shouldn't all have to do it themselves and take the path that I had to take, you know. So that's one thing I would say. Get involved with us and that launching the website in between now and then, and garnering all of the event information to start that monthly calendar, which I think would be helpful. And also have a website that's a clearinghouse for a lot of different important information. Because what would be awesome is ultimately we have this network of, here are these Asian theater companies, here are these Black African American companies, here's the brown ones, here's Filipino, here's whatever the combination is, but we all are aware of each other and we all can move together when necessary, right?
Yes.
And it's just starting. It's only been a few months effort. We've had a couple of mixers. They've both been successful. We realized from these first 2 mixers too that we need to, because again, everything is an experiment, right?
Yep,
When you haven't done it for the first time.
Yep.
So what I think we all on agreement with now is that in the future we're going to split the formatting. Instead of trying to do a mingle thing and a discussion interview thing, it's like we're going to have interview, discussion, forums as their own event, and then we're going to have like purely social mingle things as their own event. So there will be more events, and that all is just to back up what I was saying about finding your people.
Yeah.
And the goal of the ATX Stage Diversity is to make sure that we all look at all of these different groups who are all in the same boat, as this is all our people. Yeah. We're not just restricted to our immediate ethnic community, but that we see a bigger community.
I think that's really beautiful, because a lot of what we're talking about right now, I think, is how power and all the different forms of oppression can be so divisive.
Yeah.
And there's so many ways in which we end up infighting around all of this stuff. And so I think this is such a cool example of coming together. And I feel like that we can maybe take that as a lesson of that being possible in other areas too, around organizing work and everything, because that's something that I think is really missing.
Especially in a community as white as this one.
Yes.
And wider by the day. That's the other thing. We're all endangered species. I'll give you an example. The kind of collective idea behind what we're doing. The groups that have been pushing the formation and the events of ATX Stage Diversity. There's me representing the Latino Comedy Project. There's Laura Galan Wells and Cindy Brio who represent Escándalo, which is an improvised telenovela.
So good. I saw that.
Yeah. They're awesome, and then there's Simply Courtney from Sugar Water Purple, which is an African American improv group, and there's Cindy Sue, who represents Lucky Chaos, which is an Asian theater company. So the four of us of our organizations have been the driving engine behind doing this, and that is a perfect representation of what we're talking about. It's like over multiple communities, we all sit down at a table and figure out how we're moving together collectively and how we're also moving together, bringing other people behind us. So again, it's all in the early stages and we're still feeling out how we're going to do it, but I do know we're not going to be able to do it without more help. Absolutely. So if you feel strongly about these kind of issues and you want to be part of a solution to it, because these things only happen with the team, really. Especially things of this. And I'll throw another thing in. This is the kind of stuff I'm talking about. Rudy Ramirez, who's a director at the Vortex, artistic director at the Vortex, wrote a column a week ago or so about the lack of, he looked at 10 Latinx theater companies in Austin and their productions in 2019, and not one of them got a review. Not one of them. So he proved, but then he immediately, those conversations started happening immediately. Right. With those critics. He was meeting with them and they were saying, oh yeah, we're going to do our best and we're going to try better. Okay, which may or may not happen, but the marker has been set, right? And the context has been set. So he put that marker down, supported it with data and research, but also did it, in his case, he did it in a very kind way, giving them a lot of benefit of the doubt, which was because it left it open for dialogue there, which was a healthy thing. Yeah. And so there has been a lot of dialogue just in this short time, and I'm pretty sure that we're going to see more reviews of Latinx productions in Austin. Yeah. Estar Guars will hopefully be one of them, because
exactly. I was just thinking that.
Because we didn't get a review. We ran for 2 weeks.
It's selling out.
It was selling. Yeah. Well, that was the other thing that's interesting. It's like LCP has not gotten any reviews for Gentrifucked or Estar Guars, and Gentrifucked had like multiple runs. Yeah. Multiple runs. And every time we brought it back, it sold out. Yeah. Even the last time we did it at the Austin Sketch Fest, which was a one-off show at the Spider House, which is not a small venue, they sold that out. So they've had plenty of opportunities to see it and write it up. And it's about Austin. Right. It's not some playwright out of New York that we're producing their show. It's about literally there's stuff in the show about the piñata shop. Right. What happened? I mean, in fact, the sketch in that show is it takes place in the what used to, it's closed down now, but the cafe. Yeah. So it's basically a scene that takes place in that space among the cats. So they're debating what happened, and one of the people that shows up is a survivor from the bulldozing of the piñata shop, this grizzled old cat survivor who's got an eye patch, and he's like setting them all straight about what happened. So so what I'm saying is it was literally about what's happening here in Austin, and they still didn't see a need to come and review it. And I would have loved to have a review, because the people in the show the LCP performers were so incredible.
So we have one more question, and This is the question we ask everybody, and it is my favorite question. What is your favorite herb or tea?
I'm the wrong person to ask that, because I'm the person that goes in and wants some classic iced tea, and nobody ever has it. They always have all the other flavors of like, well, we have hibiscus and they list 5 things. I'm like, well, do you just have regular tea? I will tell you what I drink addictively is Diet Coke. That's my caffeine fix. And that's part of my process when I'm writing is the joyful music and a bunch of caffeine. And it's the only drug. It's my only drug in my life.
It's Diet Coke.
Well, it's always like it's like
There's
that. It's like Bride of Frankenstein. Did you ever see Bride of Frankenstein?
Yeah.
Remember that doctor? The whole movie, he's like, have a cigar. It's my only vice. And then later he'll be like, have some brandy. It's my only vice. He had a bunch of only vices.
You're like, I really do only have one.
I really do have just one vice. So
we'll forgive you.
But I love iced tea. I love iced tea with lemon. I mean,
there's a little lemon in this.
Yeah. Oh no, it's great. This is great what you serve me here. I'm not, but I'm just not. I'm afraid I'm not fancy enough for y'all. So.
No. Tea is not fancy. It's grandma medicine.
Exactly.
Well, that's what I was going to ask y'all. So, what is the significance for you guys? Like, what? Because obviously, it's an important thing to y'all. Like, what do y'all get from it? What purpose does it serve for you?
Yeah, so I studied Western herbalism and sort of Mexican herbalism, and it was like a really big part of my life for a while. So I I love everything herbal. Like I know the plants. I got to really know my environment through herbalism, and that was one of my art forms, and is one of my art forms, is like making these tea blends.
Wow.
And being in nature. And I also have a Mexican grandmother who would solve everything with té de manzanilla, hierbabuena. So it comes from that like comfort, because she's like one of my best friends, and then I sort of continued studying. So that's why it's a part of the show.
That's great. That's great. That's beautiful.
Oh, well, this has been so much fun.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Latinx Mental Health Podcast. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at LatinxMHPod, find us on Facebook and YouTube, and subscribe everywhere you listen to podcasts.
Hasta la próxima!